Samantha Wilson stood at the window of her English classroom, watching the fall rain. Drops trickled down the glass, blurring the outlines of the schoolyard. She was mechanically stirring her long, cold coffee. "Mrs. Wilson, may I come in?" A quiet voice pulled her from her thoughts. Olivia Brown, the school psychologist, was standing in the doorway. "Of course, come in." Samantha put down her cup. "Is something wrong?" "You've been working too much," Olivia said gently. "After your divorce from Robert—" "Please," Samantha interrupted, "don't talk about that." The classroom fell silent, broken only by the patter of rain. Samantha turned to the window, trying to hide the pain that still appeared at the memory of her ex-husband. "Okay," Olivia agreed, "but you know I'm always here if you want to talk." Samantha nodded gratefully. At that moment, the bell rang in the hallway, and a few minutes later, the classroom began to fill with students. Among them, Samantha immediately spotted Lucas Turner, a thin boy with brown hair and serious eyes. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Wilson," he greeted her as he passed her desk. "Good afternoon, Lucas," she replied, noticing how the boy carefully held his worn bag. The lesson went on as usual. Samantha explained the rules of grammar and the students did their assignments. But her eyes kept coming back to Lucas. Something was wrong. Usually active in class, today he was inattentive, often looking out the window. When the lunch bell rang, Samantha held him up. "Lucas, can I talk to you for a minute?" The boy came to her desk, nervously fumbling with the strap of his bag. "How are things at home?" she asked cautiously. "I've noticed that you've been a little distracted lately." Lucas looked down. "I'm fine, Mrs. Wilson. It's just—" He trailed off, biting his lip. "Just what?" She encouraged him gently. "Grandma is sick," he said quietly. "But it's okay. She'll get better soon." Samantha nodded, but something in his voice told her that wasn't the whole truth. "Are you going to lunch?" she asked. I'm not hungry," Lucas replied, but his stomach growled treacherously. Samantha thought for a moment. "You know, I have an extra lunch ticket. It would be a shame if it went to waste. Do you want to take it?" Lucas hesitated. "I can't—" "Of course you can," she insisted gently. "Think of it as my gift for your wonderful essay last week." After a long pause, the boy finally nodded. Samantha took a coupon out of her bag and handed it to him. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson," he whispered and quickly left the classroom. Samantha watched him go, feeling her heart clench. She remembered her conversation with the school nurse yesterday. "He skipped lunch again," she had said. "The third time this week, and I noticed he's lost weight." Returning to her desk, Samantha opened her journal. Lucas was one of the best students in the class. He always did his homework and worked hard in class, but lately something had changed. She took out her phone and went to the school cafeteria's website. A few clicks later, and Lucas had enough money in his account to buy a month's worth of lunches. She knew it was probably crossing a line, but she couldn't do it any other way. Samantha returned home tired, but with a sense of accomplishment. The evening sky was already overcast with heavy clouds, and a cool wind was blowing the fallen leaves along the sidewalk. She parked her old Honda outside the small two-story house she had been renting for the past 3 years. As soon as she crossed the threshold, she kicked off her shoes and walked into the kitchen. The kettle was about to boil when her phone suddenly rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello?" she answered, holding the phone between her ear and shoulder as she brewed tea. "Good evening. Is this Samantha Wilson?" she heard a deep male voice say. "Yes, it's me. My name is Michael Turner. I'm Lucas's father." Samantha froze with a cup in her hand. "Oh, good evening, Mr. Turner. I'm sorry to call you so late," he said, his voice full of excitement. "I'm calling about the lunch you paid for Lucas today." Samantha felt herself blush. "Mr. Turner, Please," he interrupted her, "let me finish. Lucas told his grandmother what you did, and she called me. I didn't even know they were having financial difficulties." He paused, and Samantha heard him sigh heavily. "You see, I send money regularly, but obviously it's not enough. Margaret, my late wife's mother, is a very proud woman. She would never say she needed help." Samantha sat down at the kitchen table. "Lucas is a very good boy. I just noticed that he often skips lunch." "He's really good," Michael's voice softened. "And I appreciate you taking care of him. It's just, it should be my responsibility, you know?" He sounded so genuinely bitter that Samantha felt her heart clench. "Mr. Turner, you don't have to—" "Michael, please. Call me Michael." "Okay, Michael. Look, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just that sometimes kids don't talk about their problems even when they're in trouble." There was silence on the other end of the line. "You're right," he finally said. "Especially when their mother died a year ago and their father doesn't even know what's going on in their lives." Samantha heard the pain and guilt in his voice. "Don't blame yourself. Sometimes circumstances are stronger than us." "I'm an engineer," he suddenly said. "I'm working on a big project in another city. When she got sick, I was already here. I tried to come as often as I could, but work. And then it was too late." His voice trembled. "Lucas never forgave me for not being there when she was dying, and I understand him." "Children often don't understand the complexities of adult life," Samantha said gently. "But that doesn't mean they don't love you." "You know," Michael continued after a pause, "when Margaret called me today, for the first time in a long time, I realized how far I was from my son's life. I didn't even know he was starving at school." Samantha drank some of the tea that had already cooled down. "Maybe now is the time to change that." "How?" He sounded helpless. "I don't even know where to start." "Start small," she suggested. "Ask him about school, his friends, what interests him. He hardly ever talks to me on the phone." "Then maybe you should come over," Samantha suggested cautiously. "Sometimes a personal presence is more important than any words." There was another long pause. "You're right," he finally said. "I should do it. But can I ask you a favor?" "Of course. Don't tell Lucas about our conversation yet. I want to talk to him myself, and Margaret too." "Of course," Samantha nodded. "Don't worry, I won't say anything. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson, for everything." "Samantha," she corrected gently. "You can call me Samantha." "Thank you, Samantha." His voice grew warmer. "And I'll pay you back for the lunches." "There's no need. Please," he insisted. "Let me at least make it right." After the conversation, Samantha sat in the kitchen for a long time looking out the dark window. She was thinking about Lucas, about his father, about the complexity of relationships between people who love each other, but for some reason cannot show it. Maybe sometimes it takes someone else to help them find their way back to each other. She recalled her own experience, how after the divorce she tried to put herself back together, how working at school and communicating with her children helped her feel needed again. Perhaps now it was her time to help someone else find their way. Outside the window, rain began to fall, and the drops hit the glass as if counting down to the beginning of something new. The next day at school, Samantha couldn't help but notice how Lucas was more focused in class. He even raised his hand a few times to answer questions. She realized that the simple presence of lunch can have such a big impact on a child. After school, when she was packing up her things, she noticed that Lucas had lingered by her desk. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for yesterday." "No need to thank me," she replied gently. "How's Grandma? You said she was sick." Lucas looked down. "She's better. It's just, she's changed a lot since Mom died." At that moment, an elderly woman appeared in the doorway. Her graying hair was neatly tied back in a bun, and her eyes showed fatigue and dignity. "Mrs. Wilson?" she asked. "I'm Margaret Collins, Lucas's grandmother." "Of course," Samantha nodded. Lucas, can you wait in the library? When the boy left, Margaret sat down on a chair near the teacher's desk. I came to thank you. And to apologize. What do you want to apologize for? Samantha was surprised. For making things so bad that my grandson had to take help from outsiders. Her voice trembled slightly. You see, after Elizabeth's death, she fell silent, taking a handkerchief out of her bag. I'm sorry. Even after a year, it's hard to talk about it. It's okay. Samantha handed her a glass of water. Take your time. Margaret took a sip. Elizabeth was my only daughter. When she was diagnosed with cancer, it all happened so fast. Michael, her husband, was working on an important project in another city. He offered to quit, but she insisted that he keep working. Was it her decision? Samantha asked cautiously. Yes, she had always been like that, thinking of others more than herself. Mom, she told me, his career is important for Lucas's future. But Michael, he never forgave himself for not being there for him in those last days. Margaret took a photo out of her bag. It showed a young, smiling woman hugging little Lucas. It was taken 6 months before the diagnosis. They were such a happy family. And then what happened? Samantha asked quietly. After the funeral, Michael became depressed. He continued to work, sent money, but emotionally, he seemed to shut down. Lucas did not understand this. All he could see was that his dad didn't come home, didn't call as often as he used to. Samantha remembered her conversation with Michael yesterday, his voice full of guilt and pain. And you? How are you coping? Margaret tried to smile, but it was sad. I'm trying to be strong for Lucas's sake. Michael sends money every month, but prices are going up. I need medicine for my arthritis, school supplies for Lucas. I've been trying to save on everything, even Lucas's food, Samantha trailed off. I'm such a terrible grandmother, Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I couldn't tell Michael. He already feels guilty about everything that happened. You're not terrible, Samantha said firmly. You're doing the best you can in a difficult situation, but sometimes you need to let others help. At that moment, footsteps were heard in the hallway, and a tall man in a business suit appeared in the doorway. His blonde hair was slightly disheveled, and his eyes, just like Lucas's, were tired. Margaret? He stopped in the doorway. I came as soon as I could. Margaret stood up abruptly. Michael? But you didn't warn me. I should have come earlier. He stepped into the classroom. Much earlier. Samantha stood up quietly. I think I'll go. No, please stay. Michael looked at her. You're the only one who has noticed what's going on with my son. I want to fix it. He turned to Margaret. Why didn't you tell me? About the financial problems, about everything. You're already doing a lot, she replied. You send money. It's not enough. He raised his voice, but then restrained himself. I'm sorry. I let everyone down. Elizabeth, Lucas, you didn't fail, Margaret said quietly. You did what you thought was right, what Elizabeth wanted. And now? He threw up his hands helplessly. What do I do now? Start by talking to Lucas, Samantha suggested. He's in the library right now. Michael nodded. Yes, you're right. But first, he turned to Margaret. I want you to know that I'm transferring back. I found an opportunity to work remotely. I won't leave you alone anymore. Margaret covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Michael came over and gently hugged her. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't see how hard it was for you. Samantha quietly left the classroom, leaving them alone. She remembered her own difficult times after her divorce, how life seemed to be over. But now, watching this family trying to get back together, she felt something akin to hope. Maybe we all deserve a second chance. Over the next few days at school, Samantha observed changes in Lucas's behavior. The boy became more smiling, more active in class. But most importantly, he no longer skipped lunch. One day after school, when she was checking his notebooks, there was a knock at the door. It was Michael. "Can I come in?" he asked, holding a paper bag. "I brought coffee, if you have time to talk." Samantha put down her pen. "Of course, come in." Michael put 2 cups of coffee on the table and sat down in a chair. "You know, yesterday was the first time in a long time that Lucas told me about his day, by himself, without being asked." "That's great," Samantha smiled. "How are you guys doing?" "It's hard," he admitted, "but we're trying. I rented an apartment not far from Margaret's house. Now I see Lucas every day after school." "He has a talent for literature," Samantha agreed, "and a great imagination. Just like his mother," Michael added quietly. Elizabeth loved to write. She had a notebook where she wrote down her thoughts and stories. After her death, I couldn't look at it, and yesterday Lucas asked me to read him something from his mom's notebook. "And you read it?" "Yes." His voice trembled. Samantha felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to leave him something of herself. "Yes. And do you know what Lucas said after I read it?" "Dad, Mom always said that even when a star goes out, its light continues to travel in space. It never goes out completely." Michael took out a handkerchief and wiped his eyes. "He's wiser than I. All this time I've been trying to escape the pain, and he's been looking for ways to keep his mom's memory alive." "Children often understand more than we think," Samantha said softly. "Yes," Michael nodded, "and they are stronger than they seem. You know, Margaret told me how Lucas helped her with the housework when her arthritis got worse. He never complained, just did what he could. He looked out the window, and I was so absorbed in my pain that I didn't notice how others were suffering. How Lucas was trying to be strong for his grandmother, how Margaret was trying to hold on for his sake. You suffered too," Samantha reminded him. "The loss of your wife." "But that's no excuse for leaving your son," he interrupted. "Do you know what the worst thing is? I almost lost him. If it wasn't for you, I was just there at the right time." "No," he shook his head. "You did what I should have done. You saw that my son needed help, and not just saw, but helped." Samantha felt herself blushing. "It was a simple gesture." "That changed everything," Michael finished. "Your simple gesture made me realize how far I had drifted away from my own family." They were silent, watching the autumn leaves whirling outside the window. "Last night," Michael finally continued, "Lucas and I had a long talk. He told me about his fears. Do you know what he was afraid of the most? That I, too, would disappear from his life like his mom." Samantha felt her heart clench. This is a natural fear for a child who has lost a parent. "Yes," Michael agreed. "But my behavior only made that fear worse. When he told me about it, I promised him that I would never leave him again. And you know what? For the first time in a long time, I saw trust in his eyes." He finished his coffee and put the glass down. "Margaret has changed too. Now she lets me help her. We plan the budget together, and I help with medicines and other expenses." "That's good," Samantha smiled. "Sometimes the hardest thing is to admit that we need help." "You know," Michael also smiled, "Lucas said something very wise yesterday. He said, 'Dad, Mom always said that family is like stars in a constellation. Even when they seem far apart, they are actually connected by invisible threads.'" Samantha felt her eyes fill with tears. "He is a very special child." "Yes," Michael said proudly, "and I won't miss a single moment of him growing up again." After he left, Samantha sat at her desk for a long time, thinking about the power of small acts, how one good deed can set off a chain of change that changes people's lives, and that sometimes the most important thing is just to be attentive to those around you. 3 months have passed. Samantha stood at her classroom window, watching the students play snowballs during recess. "Mrs. Wilson!" Lucas burst into the classroom, his cheeks flushed with cold. Look what my dad got me for my birthday. He handed her a brand new laptop. Now I can write my own stories just like my mom. It's a wonderful gift, Samantha smiled. Have you written anything yet? Yes, the boy beamed with joy. I'm writing a story about a teacher who helps people, just like you. Samantha felt her heart fill with warmth. Can I read it when you're done? Of course. By the way, Dad asked me to give you an invitation. He took an envelope out of his backpack. We are having a Christmas dinner. Grandma insisted that you come. She says you are now part of our family. At that moment, Michael appeared in the doorway. Lucas, have you shown Mrs. Wilson the invitation yet? Yes, Dad. Michael came closer. Samantha, we really hope you will join us. Without you, things might not be the same. No, he interrupted her. Don't say you just did your job. You did so much more. He sat down on the edge of the table. You know, I recently found a new job here in the city. The company is opening a branch and I've been asked to lead the project. Now I'll be able to be with Lucas all the time. That's great. Samantha was sincerely excited. Yes, Michael nodded. And also, I would like to offer you something. My colleagues and I are developing an educational program for children from low-income families. Free lunches, textbooks, extra classes. We need someone who understands the needs of these children. Samantha looked at him in surprise. You're asking me to become a program consultant, yes. You could help us determine what these children really need. Of course, it's extra work and you'll be paid for it. I don't even know what to say. Just say yes, exclaimed Lucas. You understand children so well. Michael smiled. See? Even my son knows that you are perfect for this role. Samantha felt her eyes fill with tears. Thank you for your trust, for the opportunity. We should be thanking you, Michael said gently. You have shown us that sometimes the simplest act of kindness can change everything. At that moment, the bell rang and Lucas rushed off to class. Michael stayed behind. You know, Margaret said something important to me yesterday. She said, sometimes angels come in the form of ordinary people who just do what they think is right. Samantha smiled in embarrassment. I'm not an angel. No, Michael agreed. You're better than that. You're a real person who hasn't passed by someone else's pain, and this is much more important. He stood up. So you're coming to Christmas dinner? Yes, Samantha nodded. I would love to. After he left, Samantha went to the window. The snow continued to fall, covering everything with a white blanket. She remembered that fall day when she had simply decided to help a hungry student. Who would have thought that this small act would lead to such a change?